Anthony, your campaign literature says that you lived in Vermont for 30 years. I think our visitors would like to know something about your early background. Can you tell the viewers where you're from originally and where you grew up?
I grew up in what we would call the New York metropolitan area. I grew up actually in New Jersey, not too far outside of New York City, in what was at the time a fairly quiet suburb. Is now a pretty bustling, crowded suburb, lots of cars, lots of traffic. I lived there with my parents and three brothers up through high school, and I left there when I went off to college. I eventually graduated from Johnson State College up in northern Vermont, and have been in Vermont certainly ever since. So I think back to those years growing up in New Jersey, and I look at what we see around us in Vermont, and it makes me that much more committed to trying to preserve the sense of community and the environment and the kind of values and quality of life that we have here in Vermont.
You served as senior policy advisor for Bernie Sanders. Can you tell us about some of Bernie's policies that you worked on? Can you tell the viewers about some of those policies which related to senior citizens and urban dwellers?
Sure. I was actually very proud that I had the opportunity to work with Bernie Sanders. This was when he was first elected to the U.S. House, not in the Senate. And I worked primarily out of the office here in Burlington, although I also had the opportunity to travel back and forth and work in Washington from time to time as well. And my job as senior policy advisor really involved me in a range of issues, everything from agriculture and small business to senior citizens. At that time, there were some heated debates around the issues around the free trade agreements, and I also worked with him on a range of environmental issues as well. So one of the things I would do is spend time meeting with and listening to the concerns of seniors and others, and be able to bring that information back to Bernie and be that kind of liaison. Certainly at that time, when it came to seniors particularly, some of the issues were around the attempts to privatize, let's say, Social Security, do away with Social Security, which is something that clearly Bernie and the rest of us were very much opposed to. But I think the issue that really rose to the top then, and frankly is still pretty close to the top, is the cost of prescription drugs. And viewers may know that cost of prescription drugs is it's the fastest rising cost in healthcare, and clearly seniors tend to be, I wouldn't say dependent, but tend to use multiple drugs. Many seniors are buying 3, 4, 5 prescriptions a month, and particularly living on a limited income, that's a very, very difficult thing to do. And there are some Medicaid drug programs, Medicare drug programs, but there are also these holes that people would fall into where benefits would be decreased or co-pays would go up. And so one of the constant refrains we heard from seniors was the need to do something to, the way it would be phrased would be to lower the price of prescription drugs. Now, frankly, when we look around the world, and Bernie certainly did this, he eventually ended up taking seniors up to Canada to buy prescription drugs. What you see is that in every other industrialized nation, prescription drug pricing is controlled in one way or another, and drug prices are a lot less in other countries than they are here in the United States. I mean, the obvious example is Canada, where certain drugs would be, cost 10 times more here in the United States than they do in Canada. And frankly, Canada has the second highest drug prices in the world. If you go to places like Italy or other European countries, prices are even lower. So what we tried to do was to work with seniors and work with other members of Congress. At that point, really just to begin to raise this issue of the cost of prescription drugs. It's one of these long-term issues that has to be dealt with over time. But Bernie was certainly then, and I think continues to be, one of, if not the loudest voice in terms of standing up to the pharmaceutical drug companies and their excessive profits and their willingness to rip off senior citizens here in the United States. And I was a part of that effort, both when I was working with him, and then even after that job, I moved on to other work where the price of prescription drugs continued to be a big issue. The other thing that's just to mention, because you mentioned urban dwellers, and one of the things that we were able to play a lead role on, and Bernie continues to, and now he's in the Senate, are issues around affordable housing. And, Burlington has been a model for other places and developing its Burlington Community Land Trust, which is not just land, as you know, it means to use that land to build and make available housing that is going to be forever affordable. There's always a lot of talk about affordable housing. There's been a lot of talk about affordable housing in Montpelier even this year, and we can touch on that more in a minute, how they define affordable and whatnot. But I think the other issue that was extremely important to the people of Burlington and to Vermont was to find ways to make housing more affordable. Right now in Vermont, and this was the case then as well, and we're talking a couple of years ago now, the average family in Vermont can't even afford the average home when you look at statistically, what it takes to come up with a down payment, what it takes to make the monthly payment. We have a serious problem with affordable housing across Vermont, and certainly in Burlington there has been for quite some time. But it's not just home ownership, but also the ability to have affordable rental properties. So Bernie was always a strong voice for that as well. So I think those are two of the, there were many issues, but those are two that were very important during that time, and honestly continue to be important for him and for me.
In response to the energy crisis, it has been suggested that windmills be built on the ridgelines of the Green Mountains. What is your position on this issue?
Well, I think that, let me put it this way. I think that we have failed to do any real energy planning, which is obviously unfortunate. I believe that our energy future will contain a mix of more energy efficiency, but also a mix of renewable energy. And it will include hydro and wind and solar and also power generated on farms. And we have to decide which of those are most appropriate to Vermont and where those various renewables will fit in. I mean, whether it's hydro or wind, there's going to be issues around environmental issues and community issues. I think that wind has become controversial in part because of a couple of very large projects where local people feel as if they were being sort of railroaded or, through the local process. So I think we have to be careful as we look at wind to make sure that the experiences we have are positive, that local people are respected, and that any wind development that we have is, what I would call appropriately scaled. I mean, I'm not a technician, so I don't know about how better to define that, but I think that it'll be a mix of appropriate Vermont-owned or independent, renewable, safe, clean power sources.
Running out of time now. How can our viewers, if they want to contribute to your campaign for governor, how can they do that?
Well, the easiest way these days has to be to go to the website, of course.
Which is printed at the bottom of the screen. Right,
which is anthonypollina.com. We do have an office here in Burlington on Battery Street, 166 Battery Street, down near the lakefront. People could come by and stop in and help us out that way as well. There's another website as well called Democrats for Pollina, and that has the names of close to 400 people who have signed on as people consider themselves Democrats but are supportive of the campaign as well. So people can go to democratsforpollina.org, or they can go to anthonypollina.com, or they could come down to the office on Battery Street and ask how they can help out that way as well, and also get involved in some of the events that we're planning over the next couple of months. We want, it takes a lot of money to run a campaign. We're not going to raise as much as the other people do, but what it really takes is volunteers and commitment and for people to be active, and that's a lot of what this campaign is about. So I would encourage people to stop by or give a call or, contact us through the email and get involved.